All right, so welcome to our 2026 Harvard Varsity Legislation Docket Debrief. My name is Sebastian Asady. I'm the debate director for EIF if you don't already know me. Let's get to it. Do note that for this year, the system has changed. The docket is already set. So what you're seeing on screen here is what you will be debating. It is in this order. So for example, Prelim 1 is going to start with the Haitian Recovery Act and then go into the ban of the use of AI in ICE and Border Patrol. Prelim 2 will follow the same order, Prelim 3, Prelim 4, and so on for every single round. So first up in prelims, we've got the Haitian Recovery Act. If you don't already know, Haiti is a country in the Caribbean, and they've been flooded with instability. They've been dealing with crime, all sorts of different things, and it's really kind of tragic how everything unfolded. But that's where they're at right now. Things are not going well, in summary. As I was saying, all this is trying to do is restore stability in Haiti by giving $1 billion to address like humanitarian crisis. It does these through a bunch of different ways, as you can see by Section 3. So we've got $500 million to the Haitian National Police, $300 million in humanitarian aid, and $200 million for future economic development and future government support. To help with the distribution of this aid and to make sure that everything goes well, we're sending a group of a maximum of 1,000 troops to Haiti to assist in this mission. And the Department of State is going to keep auditing the aid to make sure that everything is working as intended, as seen by Section C and D. Stock F here. Stock F is the same as any other countries in crisis they need aid debate, be it Sudan, Myanmar, or in this case, Haiti. The general idea is there are people in crisis, and we have the resources to help alleviate the effects of the crisis. So we're going to give it to them. 1000% the sponsor here is going to go up and give a speech that's like, Haiti is currently in ruin. They're being run by gangs. They don't really have much of a government. Even the police is kind of not doing too hot, right? And so the country has unfolded into anarchy, and it's gotten to such a bad point where people are literally being lynched on the streets, right? We need to put an end to this. How do we do that? Firstly, by reinforcing our ties and connections to the Haitian National Police with the $500 million that we provide. This gives them the resources that they need because it is true that the number one biggest issue, aside from corruption, so we'll put an asterisk next to that, that the Haitian National Police is facing is funding. They don't really have any funding infrastructure, which means that the couple thousand of policemen that are still in Haiti are operating or literally running off of fumes, right? And that's not going to hold much longer, which is why the gangs have seen so much success in taking over the country. So we're going to give $500 million to bolster those security initiatives alongside our troops to help the Haitian National Police regain, law and order in the country once and for all. The second point allows us to help the people on a personal level. We do that through the administration of humanitarian aid, including food, medical supplies, and clean water. It is also true that gangs have basically sabotaged water sources as a means of coercion for the local people, meaning that they're basically stopping people from having access to clean drinking water because they want people to join the gang. And so their condition is like, if you join our gang, we will let you drink water. It's gotten that bad. And so, with basically no other alternative, people are just joining gangs left and right, which worsens the violence. So, this bill is going to provide them an alternate lifeline so that they don't have to turn to gangs for the basic necessities of life. And finally, for $200 million is like a future outlook thing in this third section here. We're going to try to give them a good foundation and a good basis to work off of for the future so that they can develop a stronger economy with new business. We can potentially rebuild their government, et cetera, et cetera. Stockneg basically goes up and says the exact opposite of that. Stockneg's key point that I've seen in any Haiti debate is the fact that the government and police of Haiti are really, really corrupt because of the framework that gangs have already instituted. What I mean by that is, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that the number of policemen inside the Haitian National Police right now is between 8,000 and 11,000. And for a country of about 11 million, that's basically nothing, right? So they don't really want to have to sacrifice their life for a country that's already in crisis, so they are corrupt. A lot of officers do let the violence go on, and they do take bribes from gangs because they're not willing to fight for a lost cause, essentially. Um, and so that level of corruption has further weakened the Haitian National Police. It's like a cycle. So This money is basically not going to do anything. It's in effect, it might even just reinforce gangs because the money is not going to its intended purpose. On top of that, the $300 million for humanitarian aid, because of the fact that we are not able to effectively administer it, is just going to get stolen by gangs. Even though Section 3B of this legislation provides no more than 1,000 personnel to assist the Haitian National Police in the aid distribution, remember that the Haitian National Police is corrupt. But secondly, where are we actually going to get that in? Because not too long ago, some gangs in Haiti actually took over control over Haiti's largest port outside of Port-au-Prince, meaning that they basically have full control of everything that comes in and out of the country. So getting our aid there in the first place is going to be a logistical nightmare. And even if we do get it there, actually making sure that it is getting to the people that need it is unbelievably difficult because even with 1,000 troops at the most, plus maybe 8,000 policemen at the maximum. That's 9,000 workers against gangs that have potentially like hundreds of thousands of members across the country, right? So it's just a numbers game. And that makes it really risky, right? Is this worth what we're putting on the line? That's what the neg has to argue, and they have to say that it's not. Um, the $200 million clause here in Section 3A is not really going to provide a strong basis for any neg argument, in my opinion. I mean, you could argue that the governments that are existing right now are falling apart, so this is not worth anything, but you can't really prove a net harm for economic development initiatives, at least off the top of my head. There might be a really unique argument there to find, so I definitely suggest researching that out, but I can't think of anything like this that can just give a good neg argument. So in terms of the whole context of the round, I think the AF can definitely win here off of a really rhetoric heavy, like emotional, deep impact that allows, us to provide aid for people who really need it. Like go into the whole kids are being literally enlisted into gangs because of how dire the situation is. That is how I think the AF framing would win because the neg can win on statistics. The neg can win, at least in debates that I've seen in the past, off of the fact that this mission is next to impossible in genuine logistics, and the success rate is very, very low. There have been several other nonprofits that have tried to do stuff like this in the past that has not worked, especially with the humanitarian aid. You can also very easily prove that the Haitian National Police is not a body to be trusted. So anything like card wise probably leans towards the neg, but the AF can always win with a very emotional, very impactful speech. A bill to ban the use of AI and ICE and border patrols. So context, right? Background. If you've been living under a rock recently, or you just haven't been paying attention to the news, which is completely fine, and I'm honestly jealous of you, you probably won't be aware of the fact that ICE and Border Patrol is kind of going crazy over the country right now, and it's a big, big source of political tension, between both sides of the aisle. Even right now, the US government's in a partial government shutdown because parties cannot agree on how to properly fund this initiative, among other things. So, in Minnesota, there were two killings. Whether they were justified or unjustified is not something I will comment on. But there were two killings of one was of Renee Good, and the other one was of a nurse more recently by ICE officers who were carrying out assignments distributed to them. And both instances were very tragic, and both have caused a lot of protests, especially in Minnesota. And so a few days ago, Minneapolis looked almost like a war zone if you see some photos online. Um, it's like I said, it's a very, very large point of political tension. This bill, I assume, wants to make the jobs of, or sorry, it wants to prevent the usage of AI by Border Patrol and ICE to ensure that these operations are carried out more fairly, if even that. Um, as far as I know, AI is not being currently used an incredibly large amount in these operations. Um, the only technology that I do know is being used by ICE and Border Patrol and the NSA and everything is facial recognition technology. Um, I don't really know why they're banning LLMs, but maybe that's for like legal proceedings. But I think the biggest key here is facial recognition technology. Like I think that the impacts of that compared to LLMs is like significantly larger because in truth, AI is biased, whether you like it or not. There have been countless studies proving time and time again that artificial intelligence does have some racial bias in it sometimes. And so when it's used to make decisions that factor in someone's nationality or ethnic background, it often tends to make decisions against the minorities and instead favor like majority races, like, those who are white. So in that regard, as AI gets better day in day and day, day after day after day, like still hasn't effectively fully solved that issue. And so that's a really big problem when you're talking about ICE and borders and custom protection, because the whole like political rhetoric landscape right now is this idea of like, all this rhetoric about people from like the southern border, people from Latin America that are like coming into this country and causing crimes, right? It's been something that the Trump administration has been very, very, open about. Um, there was actually a headline on Fox News, like a meme that came around, where they said that it was something about like some sort of border policy, and it was like no immigrants seen from like three Mexican countries, which I don't know if you can see the obvious problem there, but there are no three Mexican countries. There is one Mexican country. But yeah, that's the kind of rhetoric that's being pushed around. And so race and ethnic background is a very, very large driver of decision making nowadays. I mean, it's not good, it's not fair. So this bill is trying to alleviate that. So Stock Act, definitely fixing the whole unjust bias problem with AI. Even if AI is not being used to a large extent right now, it's better to be proactive and ensuring that it can't expand any further in these operations to ensure that more people don't get discriminated against because AI will discriminate because we've seen that in the past, right? What does discrimination against these people even look like? It can look like their sentence getting completely like exaggerated, like in a court, and they can get deported over minor issues like a parking ticket, or other things like that, right? If facial recognition technology in particular is being used in these situations, you're going to have these technologies essentially racially profiling people, and it might save ICE or BCP time, processing time, by just going ahead and being like, this person cannot be here for XYZ reason, but primarily the bias comes from the fact that they are of a different skin color than the officer, right? That's never fair. And so this bill is trying to prevent that from expanding, right? Stock neg, I think that the stock neg is very similar to the Emory bill about using AI in immigration courts. Not exactly the same thing here, but AI as a whole makes things more efficient, um, regardless of what that thing is. So, in the case of ICE and Border Patrol, the neg can argue using AI in these operations allows for increased efficiency, allows for potentially more accuracy. It's not impossible to prove that AI is genuinely more accurate in some cases. It can help with finding the facts or making deductive reasoning, through LLMs. Or it can help bridge the gap between like training that might exist and actual procedure, because we've seen, like I said, with the two examples of those two shootings in Minnesota, it's clear that some ICE officers have not been trained to the actual standard of what like training guidelines should be it for one reason or another. And so, if they're using that improperly trained decision making to make final decisions about a suspect or something, maybe if they were to use an AI and an LLM to help with that decision making, right? Like AI shall be defined as any software application which assists in law enforcement decision making, operations, and other tasks. If they turn to the AI, maybe the AI isn't as biased as the affirmation paints it out to be. And these can help with making more comprehensive and more understanding decisions in the whole situation. So, in the context of the debate, I think that The AF definitely rides very well off of the political rhetorical landscape. What I mean by that is that the AF is not going to have a hard time whatsoever going through this round, riding off of like all of the anger that has been seen across the country regarding this issue, right? You can give a very fiery speech on the AF and be like, look at what ICE is doing to our cities, or look at what Border Patrol is doing to our cities. And I'm not surprised if that is really what the AF champions and is like, we need to stop them at all costs. Um, is that a politically biased point of view? Probably, yeah. If you're looking at the issue completely objectively, there have been infringements in justice, but there have also been potentially some unforeseen upsides. Like you have to look at both sides of a situation. Again, this is not me disclosing my personal issue on the political topic. I want to be like very clear about that. But looking at everything through an objective point of view, there is an F and there is a neg here, right? There is truth to the fact that some ICE operations and some Border Patrol operations have had some good effects on the country, right? Not all of what you see online is inherently like bad about ICE because they have, taken out a significant portion of criminals. Is that their main objective and is that what they've actually been doing? Probably not, but that's again for you to decide with the evidence. So research this deeply because the AF definitely goes in on a potentially politically biased point of view, which might hurt you with some Republican judges, and can get you all in on the idea of like ICE is bad, CBP is bad, get them out, right? Make their jobs hard because look at what they're doing to our country. And then that goes on the flip side. That's like, well, in reality, the media kind of like potentially overplays what their operations are, and they're maybe doing a lot of good, right? I personally think that the AF is stronger here, kind of solely because of the whole political landscape thing. Um, but then again, research this to the best of your ability, and please, please, please make sure to take an unbiased, objective stance at the issue. Because while you can give a very persuasive and comprehensive speech on the AF, riding solely off of fiery political rhetoric, it might not be the smartest idea for a debate, especially when it's something this touchy. Because there may be a significant upside to using artificial intelligence in law enforcement technology because who knows, maybe the AF can be like, look at ICE and look at how they're profiling our citizens and all of that and look at their like misconduct and the net could potentially prove like AI actually makes that better by providing them with a more like holistic point of view that really factors in all different aspects of the issue. On to prelim session number two. All right. A bill to aid Egypt. This one is in some ways similar to the Haiti one, but I think that's also still a stretch. So probably don't make that comparison. That's just for the sake of providing some idea of how to navigate this debate. Context. So in Egypt right now, they're kind of facing a crisis on three fronts. On the northern side of the country, they're receiving lots of refugees from the Israel-Gaza war, which has caused a lot of strain on their humanitarian support system. In the south, they're receiving a lot of refugees from the Sudanese civil war, which is on track to be one of the bloodiest, if not the bloodiest conflict um, in a very, very, very long time. So the crisis in Sudan is absolutely dehumanizing. The crisis in Israel and Gaza, while it has definitely calmed down recently, is still a very big crisis. And on top of those, Egypt is facing internal crises of their own. Egypt is not in a great state right now, basically. And they don't have the effective resources to support everyone in all three cases, whether you're a refugee from Gaza, whether you're a refugee from Sudan, or whether you're trying to navigate life under the faltering state of the economy in Egypt as an Egyptian citizen. So, what does this bill plan to do? We're going to give $400 million in humanitarian aid through the maritime border with Saudi Arabia, which is just south of the Suez Canal. And we're going to be allocating U.S. troops as necessary to deliver the aid to Department of State representatives at the border. Humanitarian aid consists of what it always consists of, which is supplication for agricultural purposes, temporary housing, bottled water, medical supplies, vaccines, and first aid equipment. Um, we're also going to be protecting our ships, which is a pretty important clause, I think, and I think it could be definitely overstated, or sorry, understated in the debate. Section 2C here, where we're arming ships used for transport for probably for self-defense, and I hope it's for self-defense. Um, the idea is to protect the aid from any bad actors that might want to sabotage it, which is always a good idea. Um, the truth is that the situation in North Africa and the Middle East is super, super, super tense right now. If you've seen what's happened in Iran, if you've seen what's happened in Israel and Gaza, all sorts of different like crises going on at the same time, right? And so it's kind of taken the whole region by storm. And with parties like the Houthis in Yemen basically shooting missiles and drones at cargo ships in the Red Sea, that was a while back, but that kind of shows what their intention is. So we're going to be arming ships under this legislation such that they can protect themselves from those threats if necessary. And that's just like as an extra shield or layer of protection. So I think that that's definitely useful for an AF response to the whole like argument of this aid is in danger because of the region or something, or it might be stolen by like terrorist groups. Do I see that coming up as an actual argument? I don't think so, but there is an argument to be made there, which we'll get into later when we talk about the neg. Um, but okay, let's jump on over to the flip side and let's talk about the stock AF. So, of course, like this is where like the similarity with the Haiti debate kind of came in. Um, when we're talking about Israel Gaza, we're talking about the Sudanese civil war, when we're talking about the economic state of Egypt, we're talking about three potentially like era defining crises in Egypt history, right? In Egyptian history. And it's important to understand that things like not only are they not going well, there's not really a clear path forward to get out of this mess. So you've got a country in a pretty deep crisis and no clear way to navigate that. Um, who does it hurt most? It hurts the refugees from crises, such as again, who I just mentioned, and it hurts the Egyptian people. So with this legislation, we are not working with the Egyptian government because that means, we're just going straight to the people. We're doing this because we want to ensure that throughout this crisis, we're going to be providing Egyptian citizens and potentially refugees from other crises with a sustainable lifeline that is backed by the Stars and Stripes. That's so important because we're going to ensure that people have the resources that they need to survive with agricultural supplication and bottled water, the shelter that they need to survive, which is the temporary housing, and the medical, you know, requirements that they might have to stay alive, which is medical supplies such as vaccine and first aid equipment. Um, there is not really a super deep AF to go with here. I think the strongest AF is to definitely tie this into the three crises structure that I was already talking about and go into the whole like you've got Israel and Gaza, you've got Sudan, and you've got Egypt almost kind of faltering on its own. And the two crises from the north and the south are really overburdening the country in the middle. So if Egypt is facing such a large crisis on three fronts, it requires a three-front response, and we give that with this legislation, right? Frame that however you like, but I think that's how the strongest AF works. Now for the neg. I personally am not entirely sure what the neg would be here. I think that the AF off of that emotional structure alone kind of succeeds at accomplishing its end goal because Egypt doesn't have the whole ravaged by like chaos kind of structure that Haiti is going through right now. Egypt is in a lot better of a place, thankfully, and they are not like I guess on like the same level of crisis. So there is no like significant quote unquote corruption arguments to run like Haiti, where the aid is just going to automatically get stolen and there's no way to support it. Um, I think that there is definitely an argument to be made about the Egyptian government because, from what I remember, and I might be wrong, but there has been a significant number of reports coming in saying that like the Egyptian government on its own is committing a significant number of atrocities of some sort and they might not be the best organization to work with. Now, mind you, this bill is not explicitly stating we're working with the Egyptian government. It kind of just says that we're going straight to the citizens of Egypt, but that is still definitely something to consider. So, in the context of the debate, I think AF is just strongest here. Like, there's not really much competition, especially because you can go all in. It's very similar to the Haiti debate on the emotional aspect of things. Of like, look, you've got people fleeing one of the bloodiest wars the world has ever seen in Sudan. You've got people fleeing constant shelling and like, failing infrastructure and crumbling homes in Gaza and are now fleeing to Egypt, right? And as a result, Egypt has been so overwhelmed by the whole situation that they can't support it themselves. So it's time for us to step in because we have the resources to do so. Um, do I think that that's sponsor framing? Probably. I think it's any early speech framing. But the AF doesn't really have to go any further than that to win the debate because unless the Ned can make a very, very strong counter argument, there is not necessarily anything else that the AF has to prove. You prove that Egypt really needs this. You prove that Egypt will benefit from this, and in the context of regional escalation. And I think that you're good. The only thing that to keep an eye out for, though, last thing is U.S. intervention might not be received well. Um, there might be a whole like display of anti-American sentiment in the Middle East right now, and that might extend over to Egypt. I'm not entirely sure, but the question over how this aid will be received and if U.S. presence is actually like wanted is something that you should also research on your own. So, do you guys have any questions? All right, from Lucas. How do we navigate the fact that this bill only gives aid to Egyptian citizens and not refugees? Um, I see what you mean. It does give humanitarian aid to the citizens of Egypt, but like to be completely honest, if you're administering aid on this scale, telling who is an Egyptian citizen and who's not an Egyptian citizen is going to be very difficult, especially when the Egyptian government is not in a state like to be able to facilitate that on a large scale. Um, I personally think that if it becomes such a big point of contention that is like so specific in your round, that is like everyone firmly believes that this bill only goes to the citizens of Egypt and nobody else, propose an amendment. Like this is one of those very rare instances where I would be like, that kind of makes sense as the strat. Because I mean, logically, if you want to expand the impact, you just be like humanitarian aid through Egypt's maritime border with Saudi Arabia. You can kind of just like omit this section, and then all of that goes away. But if that doesn't pass in your chamber, then at least you tried. It happened when I debated at GMU and it was mad annoying. Yeah, I don't expect that happening at Harvard. If it does, I'll be surprised. But I just don't understand why it would be such a big point of contention if it's just like, oh, specifically Egyptian citizens can get it. Because keep in mind, you can definitely respond to that by being like I said, even the citizens of Egypt are struggling right now because so many resources are going to combating the refugee crisis. So maybe on the AF, you can turn that by responding with, look, as dysfunctional as Egypt might be right now, they are focusing on the external problems of like the refugee crisis from both sides. We're going to fill in the gap and help their own citizens because they don't have the resources to work with that. So you can basically just say Egypt has got the Israeli and Gaza refugee situation under control. They've got the Sudanese refugee situation under control. We're going to help their citizens because they're the group that's kind of been left in the crossfire and don't have the support structure that the other two groups have. I think you can definitely turn that on the AF with that framing. Um, from Adam, what was the stock neg might be? AF might be heavy. I think the only major stock negative argument that I can think of right now is that the Egyptian government is not someone we want to work with because they are having like we and the Egyptian government have our differences in how we navigate things. And the Egyptian government has certain beliefs that make not that might conflict or might conflict with the intentions of this aid package. What I mean by that is like you're not going to. this bill is essentially giving aid to a government that do not have the same interest that we do with this bill, and so they're not going to allow the aid to actually get to the people. Because, like I said, there have been reports of the Egyptian military, recently with the Israel-Gaza crisis, they've been accused of like stopping aid um, from entering the strip, and so they have their own internal policies that might create problems for this legislation. So I don't know them off the top of my head in full, but I just suggest that you definitely research that out because that could be the good basis of a very strong next speech. Okay. Also from Lucas at GMU Most Neg said that the Houthis would strike the aid down. And yeah, that's why I would say Section 2C is so important here. Because if you want to talk military strategy, the Houthis really banked off of like sabotaging supply lines, and they did that by attacking ships in the Red Sea. That's why Section 2C exists. We're providing these ships with self-defense weaponry so that they can repel these kinds of attacks. And if needed, it's not at all a stretch to say that the United States Navy will be able to support these ships if needed. We've already got an entire carrier strike group in the region because of the issue in Tehran and Iran. And so, reallocation of those kinds of protection resources would not be insanely difficult, especially if it got to such a bad point where these self-defense systems would not work by one reason or another. This is the second bill for prelim number two, I guess. Yeah. A bill to halt the expansion of United States ICBMs. I guess context throughout the United States, we've got a good amount of missile silos that we have on standby that are used for defense against the country. And we have them, we've never really had a need to use them recently, at least. But they exist as a method of self-defense. I can't lie to you. I don't really know what the point of preventing us from replacing these ICBMs is. Um, I guess there's not much context here because it's kind of self-explanatory, so I guess we'll just jump into the stock F. Stock F, I guess the idea here is an arms race, preventing an arms race, being like, hey, we're gonna stop modernizing our missile system such that like we don't want to create problems with our adversaries, which is a cool and diplomatic way of handling things. But then the neg kind of comes back and is like, is that really how politics work? And the answer is no. Unfortunately, we do need stuff to protect ourselves from attacks. It's just kind of like a way that militaries of the world works. I mean, we kind of need that deterrence aspect of like mutually assured destruction. Believe it or not, you can choose to believe that it works or not. That's up to you. The concept of MAD, but the core idea is, if you attack me, I will attack you back, and we both die. If you don't allow us to increase or especially replace our ICBMs with newer technology, we're not going to be able to keep up with our adversaries, and we're just going to get strong armed in a conflict of the future. So the neg just kind of fires back with these are really critical to our self-defense, right? We don't want to go to war, and we have a no strike first, a no first use policy with, especially with nuclear warheads. But we don't want to not have them in the off chance that they do need to be used. Could a stock AF point be that we're devoting too much money to ICBMs? I would never say that devoting too much money is an argument because you're not really proving a net harm. Um, or sorry, not like proving a net harm of having the ICBMs is what I'm trying to say because you're on the app. Um, like we are devoting a lot of money, but it's not for like a useless cause. We are really working to just protect ourselves with our ICBMs. They're not used, period, right now. Especially because remember, this legislation specifically defines ICBMs as any land-based missile. So any missiles launched by like a submarine does not count under this bill. Um, I don't really know what the idea is. Um, so yeah. Adam says, what is the AF? Maybe stop escalation, but maybe evidence. Like I said, the AF, I guess, is the whole arms race idea of like we want to prevent that from happening. And so you can definitely argue that like this bill opens the door to more diplomacy with our adversaries so that we can finally enter a new era of world peace. But that's not, I mean, with a logical reasoning background, that's not exactly like where I think this should go. Um, I I do think the stock app kind of just has to bank on the whole diplomacy thing, but it is relatively weak in my opinion. Just because like the chances of our adversaries giving up their ICBMs is like next to zero. So yeah. All right, from Elizabeth. After non-unique's leverage because our ICBMs can literally already destroy the world. So how does destroying it another time change anything? Um, I understand what you mean, but like in the context of military developments, that's not really how that works. So I'll give you a good example. Right now, we've got the nuclear triad. We've got bombers, ICBMs, and like submarines, right? Which are three different methods of delivering nuclear warheads. The reason why we keep innovating and developing new technologies for each is because our adversaries do the same, right? There's always a new technology to be uncovered. There's always a new initiative to fund. Like, for example, we've already got several ballistic missile submarines in service, but for the past, I think, decade or so, we've been building the new Columbia class submarine um, for that purpose. These are like to replace aging systems because they have a service life, and once that is exhausted, they don't work as effectively. Um, so the core idea here is like, I know for a fact that recently we have been modernizing our ICBM systems because they do function off of very old technology, and we need to catch them up to like the modern standards of today, which would be like, you know, we're developing hypersonic missiles not as ICBMs, but as other technologies. It's kind of with that whole like keeping up with our adversary kind of thing. That's why we're developing the B-21 Raider and all of that to replace older technologies, right? So it is entirely plausible to argue that like leverage is not unique, but expansion or replacement means that in a couple of years' time, those missiles might literally not work anymore, and we don't have a way to fix that. And over time, our supplies are going to dwindle. From Lucas, I don't think it'll be neg heavy because there are a lot of opinion articles that pop up when you Google why don't we need ICBMs, and people will just parrot what they read there. Um, yeah, I guess, but I will say it is. I personally think it's going to be very difficult to effectively convince a judge that basically forgetting about all of our ICBMs is a good idea, especially in the fact that like the whole situation in the world right now is kind of not great. Um, I don't really see why now is the time to be like, you know what? Peace has been declared once and for all, and the world is at a good enough place to where we can finally, hold the use of ICBMs. Like you've got China building its military up to sizes we've never seen before, even though President Xi these past few weeks has literally sacked a lot of his top military leadership. In fact, his second in command is now being charged with corruption and exposing nuclear secrets to the U.S. military. You should research that. Just, I mean, not for this debate, but in general. Um, but yeah, Russia is currently involved in that war in Ukraine, and so they're looking for ways to expand their military might. You've got China, which has already been building up their navy. Like a couple months ago, they launched a new aircraft carrier. Like it's getting to that size where now is no time to back down. I'm not saying go for an arms race, but I'm definitely saying we need to keep what we have now. A bill to promote the use of AI in schools for education. I read that wrong. A bill to promote intelligence education in schools. Um, okay. For those of you who attended Sunvite, finals had a very similar bill to this, kind of. We it was like the inverse though. That bill was to ban the use of AI in schools. This one is to promote the use of AI in schools. Um, so what is this bill doing? Context, I guess all you gotta know is just AI is becoming really dominant now. It's being invested in by tens of companies, or if not no, probably like thousands of companies, sorry. But like tens of major companies. And it's like the whole craze. And now it's being used in education. And I won't lie to you, like I've used AI in school before. I use it to make study guides. I use it to review concepts. I reuse it to like review writing if I really need to. All of that, like, for example, if you use like Grammarly, if you want to count that as an AI, then yeah, I use Grammarly to review some stuff I've written to correct it. Like everyone has. And it's because AI has become so normalized so quickly, and the fact that our school system has not kept up with that like pace, that either you have to like fight it, which might be a little bit foolish, or embrace it because it's the future, right? So let's break down section two. Uh, Section 2A, AI shall be defined as the application of computer systems that are able to perform tasks or produce output normally requiring human intelligence. That's just explaining what an AI is, which fits the definition of almost any normal AI. Section 2B, developments of standardized AI literacy modules covering fundamentals of machine learning, ethical considerations, and responsible use. That's important. We'll get back to that. Section 2C, funding for teacher training programs to to equip educators with the skills to teach AI related topics. Cool. And Section 2D, partnerships with universities, research institutions, and private sector organizations to provide resources and materials. I don't really know what those resources and materials will be used for, but teach their own, I guess. Um, okay. We're also giving $500 million a year to fund this program. So I guess what this is trying to do at its core is bring the future of technology into education settings for our kids, which include people like you and me. So I do want to say, important note that this does include like this does specify K to 12 public school curriculum. Um, and I say that's important because I guess in the context of like the Sunvite final speech that I gave, we had a round where, like I said, it was a bill to ban the usage of AI in educational settings. So basically, just no use of AI in grades that weren't in high school, I believe. I believe it's any grade like lower than ninth grade could not use AI in school. And I read an app speech because I did some research and I found out that if used incorrectly, AI can actually have significant negative effects on a child's development because you can have one of two outcomes with an AI and like a young kid who may be in kindergarten, under the context of this bill. Um, when AI is used correctly, it supplements thinking, meaning that it can help the student learn better, especially if they've got like disabilities and things like that. But when used incorrectly, AI kind of substitutes thinking, meaning it replaces the thinking of the child, and the child becomes almost fully dependent on it because they don't know how to use it properly, which is really, really important, especially in this debate because of the nuance that that brings in. Um, so, what does it mean to effectively teach someone how to use AI? Well, according to the research that I did, which was corroborated by some like MIT study from the MIT Media Lab, um, AI was used effectively with children when the child who was using the AI was working one on one with an adult figure that was helping them understand how to use the AI. If that is absent, then you get to the whole like substituting outcome that we were already talking about, which is bad, right? So essentially, good ending is where the kid learns how to use AI, which is what this bill wants to do, and works with it to develop their thinking skills, et cetera, et cetera. Bad ending is where the student becomes almost fully dependent on the AI because it doesn't know how to use it properly. It will believe its false like statements almost automatically. Um, and the child kind of starts to realize, oh my God, this tool is so awesome. It can do everything for me that they start to forget how to do things on their own. And those are some real concerns that we have going forward. So, what does this bill try to do? I guess we'll back it up and we'll go back to the standard structure here. So, stock F. Basically, AI is the future. We got to stop fighting it. We got to embrace it because it's important to start early and teach kids how to use AI with like, especially with Section 2B here, right? Development of standardized AI literacy modules covering fundamentals of machine learning, ethical considerations, and responsible use. It's important to start early with teaching kids how to use AI now because by the time that they become an adult, it is very, very, very likely that AI is going to be even more widespread than what it is now, right? What that means for our kids is like if they don't get the training that they have now, the future world is going to be so much harder to navigate. That's like the stock half, right? Um, Other half arguments can be like currently teachers who are trying to prohibit the use of AI in schools often rely on AI detectors, like GPT-0 and all of that. However, problematically, those detectors are also biased, like the AI we mentioned in that ICE debate. And that presents a lot of problems. You're going to have students who are in minorities that are not going to receive the same grade or recommendation as someone who is in a majority race. And that creates a lot of issues. So the solution is what, right? Stop relying on those AI detecting softwares and instead promote the use of AI so that the kid is not going to be judged by a robot that is somewhat racist. Um, but instead, you're not going to have a reason to use that bot at all because you're going to be able to use the literacy modules here, and AI is not going to be prohibited in schools. What is the neg? The neg is kind of what I already told you about my speech, which was the whole supplementing versus substituting thinking idea. Um, Unfortunately, this bill might not have like the existing foundation to make this work. Like, I mean, teachers are already overworked, they're already strained. You could turn that into an F argument by being like, teachers don't have the time to grade these papers properly, right? Or like, you know, trying to figure out how to deal with AI is taking out a lot of a teacher, and they don't have like the ability to deal with that. So this bill kind of reduces that burden by just making AI allowed, so they don't have to worry about that. But alternatively, the neg can be like these teachers don't have the ability to provide that like specified learning that is required under this bill. And so the kids are not going to actually reap the benefits of AI. They're going to be punished by it because they're not going to know how to use it properly, which creates problems down the road. So in the context of this debate, I think that this is a pretty even debate. I think there's not really a clear side that wins here off the top, unlike some of the other bills. I think it really can go either way, depending on what each side argues. There is a lot of nuance, though, and that's why I definitely suggest researching this out pretty heavily and extensively and figuring out as much as you can about the current situation of AI in schools before you like commit to a side. Um, but again, this debate I do believe comes down firmly to weighing, so a late round would not be a bad strategy here on either side. Um, it really is all centered around the idea of like what is better for our students, right? Like is it better for them to have AI? Is it better for them to not have AI? All right. The American Drilling Reform Act. This is another green energy debate, in essence. It's very simple. The United States is going to stop drilling oil. Um, I will say, because of the current situation regarding oil, please do not run a Venezuela or Nicolas Maduro related intro. I definitely think it's going to be very overused, um, just because of like the oil references. But jokes aside, this is a very, very simple green debate. I think that like this is a very interesting and intricate solution to the problem. Do I think that the vast majority of all of this is going to matter in the debate? No. I really think that the debate is going to center around the core concept of Section 1, which is just like, should we phase out drilling operations? Because, frankly, in Harvard prelims, I don't think it's smart to go all in on the details of everything here and be like, even though this looks like a very comprehensive and well researched and well put together bill, it's not exactly the smartest idea to go full on like tech and be like, okay, this is what an APD is, this is what a GHG protocol is, like this is how everything in this bill works. You can definitely give a great speech off of how the bill works and being like an explanatory speech and be like, this is how the bill actually works in practice, and here's why that's good, or here's why that's bad. But again, I just as a note before we go into either side, um, core idea is probably definitely just going to be section one. The entire debate is, I think, is going to center around just that one sentence. Like, do we or do we not phase out oil drilling operations? Pros and cons, right? Um, so here we go. Stock Ave. As with any green energy debate, the climate crisis, right? Things are not going so well. I mean, look at the massive snowstorm that we just had across the country. Even I'm in Florida right now, and this past week has been very chilly. Like yesterday, I think it got as low as like 35 degrees where I live. And I'm in South Florida, so you tell me. Like we have a big cold front because of that. But the climate crisis has created a lot of natural disasters that are getting progressively more out of hand, and that's not stopping anytime soon. Of course, oil drilling is very bad for the environment, and the use of oil is even worse. So, you're by phasing out these oil drilling operations, you're definitely going to be alleviating the effect that we're having on the private climate crisis, and you're going to allow for transitions to greener energy, um, which is always a very noble idea and is always something that we should fight for because that saves lives. Neg, I think the neg is actually pretty strong here. Um, the core idea of the neg is most likely the fact that like this bill doesn't actually stop the usage of oil, which is the biggest producer of carbon emissions. Does this bill automatically mean that we are now effectively ready to substitute our oil with solar power? No, primarily because that's not how the engineering works. You can't kind of just like feed photocells of a solar panel into a burning furnace and expect it to work the same. Yeah. So what are we going to do? Most likely under this bill, we're just going to start buying oil from other countries to fix the whole oil problem, which means that we don't really have an effect on the usage of oil. I genuinely think that like this bill, while it does have some effect on the environment, the neg can definitely mitigate by just saying like, sure, this stops drilling to an extent, but it doesn't actually fix the problem of oil usage. So we're just going to import more oil, which of course means more spending and less dependence on just ourselves, right? Like less independence. Um, that's not good for a host of very obvious reasons, primarily the fact that like a lot like we're going to be relying more on countries like Venezuela for their oil, unironically. And that again, if we what if we like start increasing oil consumption? What if we're on an uphill trend of oil consumption recently? Like that's not going to stop because of this bill. Oil demand is not directly tied to oil production because we're not the only producers. So if more people need gas, they're going to turn to an alternative source, be it from like another country, and they'll pay the premium because they don't want to switch to solar or because they can't switch to solar or wind or nuclear or whatever, right? There are some things that just require oil, like cars. So if think about it in the context of cars, if this bill means that we no longer have like the ability to keep gas prices low and competitive in America, regardless of if they are or not for you right now, then oil companies are going to start just importing from other countries to keep their prices lower or competitive, right? Which means that oil is still being burned for cars because the demand for cars is going to be the same, if not increasing, because more people are buying new cars. So, in summary, AF argues that this is good for the climate crisis. Neg argues that this basically does next to nothing for the climate crisis because it doesn't actually tie into demand. And this can actually make it worse by the argument of the whole like nobody's actually transitioning to green energy. This is actually going to increase our dependence, right? So rather than like the neg can present two worlds. One, if our demand stays constant for oil, then we're going to be more dependent on foreign nations for oil, which is bad. on the idea of like if we do see an increase in oil usage, then this bill does next to nothing for the environment, right? So it doesn't really work in either world. But the AF can always counter that with the whole idea of this is good for the environment. We need this. All right, so I believe that this is number 8 or number 7. Okay, so where were we? Here we go. All right, a bill to establish a minimum wage for working incarcerated individuals. Um, Context: people who are incarcerated do have jobs. If you didn't know, um, and they do get paid for their jobs sometimes, unless they're being punished. Um, and this is just going to increase their wages. Not much else context to provide here. So let's just jump into the stock F and stock neg. Um, Stock F here, the more money you have when you leave prison, the more like the stronger a foundation you have, like a launch pad to build off of to start your new life. So if you get in prison for like tax evasion or something, you're going to be in prison for maybe like 4 years, if it wasn't that severe. And during your time in prison, you will, work a job and things like that. And by the time you leave, you'll have that money in your bank account to start your new life. So the benefit of having more money under this bill is that you're going to have more money to work with when you leave prison. And that's almost instinctively a good thing because you're going to have more resources to rebuild your life. The problem with the current system is that there's a lot of recidivism because people do not have the resources to rebuild their life once they get out of prison. So they just go back to committing crimes and they end up back in that same courthouse and they end up back inside of a jail. So it's that like cycle that continues on and on and on that gets people put in prison all the time. And that's why we have the largest incarcerated population in the world. So the idea on this stock F here is just saying you increase the amount of money that inmates are getting, you increases their chances of uh, building a better life once they get out of college, or not college, sorry, God, prison. They're not the same thing. Um, Stock neg, I guess, can go and take a unique route with private prisons. Oh, forgot to mention for the stock F, with the private prisons thing here. If you also didn't know, there are prisons being operated by private companies for profit. That does exist in America. But they are overseen by the federal government. They have a lot of oversight. For the most part, there are a lot of like gray areas with that, but still. And Section 3B just basically says if they start to join this legislation because we can't directly enforce that on them, um, or sorry, no, if they enforce this legislation because they have to because of Section 1, then they will be reimbursed 25%. So it's not all losses. Um, yeah, I do want to point out, sorry, I forgot to mention that this just affects private prisons because I think federal prisons are on this level already. I think, not entirely sure. But I want to say that they are. So yeah, stock F is still the same. Stock neg is the idea of private prisons can't afford this. It's not going to like. There's a lot of problems with private prisons as a whole, and I think that there might be some interesting arguments to take with that. But aside from the whole like private prisons can't afford it kind of argument, there isn't any that I see are like completely working. And to and the extension of the whole like they can't afford it um argument is like Section 3A, which is the whole punishment clause, which is like if you don't comply, we'll pay you half as much as we used to. Um, if a prison can't afford to pay all inmates that minimum wage, then they're going to be punished for it and they might go bankrupt, and that's bad because we don't have the housing to support so many inmates in our own prison system, which is why private prisons exist in the first place. So yeah, aside from that, though, I'm not entirely sure what the neg is. Um, but yeah, again, in the context of the debate, pretty obviously, AF is great here. Um, talk about recidivism, talk about setting up, prisoners for new life because not every prisoner is a bad person. Like they can be rehabilitated, they can be reintegrated. This bill just makes it easier for them to do so. Okay, a bill to recognize the Republic of Somaliland as an independent nation. Um, I guess context here is just like Somaliland is a unrecognized nation right now by most countries, I think. Um, they are in East Africa. They are not exactly stable right now. I don't really know what the idea of this is. I'm not going to lie to you. I think that I don't really have much else context to provide. Like Somalia is in a very bad state right now. It doesn't really have a government. Um, and Somaliland, I guess, wants to just like put everything under new management. Um, will that work? Probably not. I have very little confidence. Uh, like I said, I don't really know what the core idea here is. Like, if you, I'll just pull up a map because I can't really describe. Oh, why can I not just? Here we go. If you don't really know, like, yeah, this is where Somaliland is in the continent of Somalia. So this is what it's internationally recognized as Somalia is like this whole like seven looking thing. This is on the east coast of Africa, and so Somaliland is this northern part here, which is broken up into all these different factions. But as you can probably tell, like Somalia, I don't know why this is in another language, but Somalia is not in a great place. Like I think very recently there's actually a news article that came out about some insane violence that was going down in Somalia. I don't know if I can find it though. I don't remember off the top of my head, but there was some issues from all of this, but I don't really know what the violence is. I can't find it. I'm sorry. All right. Well, still, as you actually probably also saw in the news articles that I just pulled out, there is a whole connection between Somaliland and Israel. I won't lie, I'm not too educated on the subject. I have heard about it, but I it could be something else that you might research and might find interesting. But it's I guess if we want to talk stock F is just this will allow Somaliland to find some legitimacy and like a new start um, in the nation. This doesn't, I mean, the neg is just, I guess, that this will not work. I don't really have much else to say about this. It's a very interesting idea, but in the context of East African politics, I'm not sure how this will play out. All right. And I believe this is the last prelim bill, I want to say. Is this the last prelim bill? Oh, no, that was the last prelim bill. Okay, so now we're on to quarters. Finally. A bill to sanction Qatar. This is our first quarters bill. Um, all right. We are sanctioning Qatar. That's all this bill's doing. And we're going to take off the sanctions once they fix their human rights problems. A very noble effort, but probably very ill-timed. Context. The Middle East is on fire right now. Um, things are not going too well. You had those protests that saw thousands of people killed in Tehran and Iran. You have the whole conflict in Israel and Gaza going on. You've got the Egyptian crisis, which we talked about not too long ago. You've got the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, among other terrorist groups in the region, causing a lot of instability. And all the meanwhile, countries like Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia have exhibited significant human rights violations, especially for migrant workers. Um, I believe that this became a very, very big like news talking point when Qatar hosted the World Cup. because they had their stadiums built by underpaid migrant workers who lived in inhumane conditions, which was truly horrifying to see. But I guess what I'm trying to say with this bill is ill-timed, and this is a neg point, definitely. The fact that we kind of need Qatar now more than ever as like a strategic stronghold in the Middle East, considering how everything is going. So I guess we'll just jump into Stock F here. Stock F is definitely the idea that by this bill, we're pushing for more expansion of human rights in the Middle East with Qatar, right? That's so important because they're causing a lot of abuses, right? They're not aligning with our ideals, and they are discriminating against significant portions of the population because of their personal views or their ethnic background, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and so, yeah, this bill is basically just mounting economic pressure until the government changes its ways. The neg, I believe, is a lot more comprehensive here. Because the neg can acknowledge, like, while this act is very noble and tries to do the right thing, is it actually going to do the right thing? Probably not, because we might as well just alienate Qatar right when we might need them most, right? We don't know how this situation in especially like in Iran is going to unfold. And so we need our military bases in Qatar, which I think are the largest ones we have in the Middle East. We need them now as that strategic base now more than ever. And passing this legislation is definitely not going to put us on good terms with the Qatari government. And so they might retaliate, not like with a physical response, but with some sort of like demand that we leave our base or something like that, right? So the neg kind of goes on this framing of like, we really, 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 really need Qatar, and anything you do that might alienate them is a bad move, because of the tensions that are in the Middle East right now. And I guess the neg kind of has to go kind of hypothetical in its impacts, because this bill is, as a whole, pretty hypothetical. Uh, but just be like, if you do sanction Qatar, what is their response going to be? Are they going to be welcoming us with like open arms and stuff, or are they going to be like upset about everything? Probably upset, right? So yeah, just to summarize, Stock AF is advocating for human rights, helping the government like become aligned with the West, which they are in the middle of trying to do right now, I will say. On top of other things, while the neg is just like now is not the right time because of the regional tensions that we're seeing in the Middle East. So, from Joshua, what ground does the AF have when the US only accounts for 1.6% of Qatari exports and they're extremely rich? How can they prove their solvency to be true? That's really interesting. I do think that like it's kind of just sending the message rather than actually trying to be like hurting them economically. I don't think there's going to be significant ramifications, but yeah, it kind of is just the whole like we want them to understand what we're saying. And also, yeah, you're right. They are rich. They can definitely foot the bill, but like they're not, we are like one of their biggest allies and we are offering some significant protections. So they also kind of need us. Um, and so any difference that we might have with them can create some issues in our a little alliance with them. So I guess that's the core idea. Oh, here's the other missile bill. Yay. Awesome. So hypersonic missiles. This is just investing in hypersonic missiles. Easy. Context. Russia and China are developing hypersonic missiles. They are our biggest adversaries. Hypersonic missiles are missiles that go very, very fast. And I mean like Mach Zoom. So we're going to be building these hypersonic missiles to make sure that we're on this even playing field with them. Um, as you can see, Mach 5. So I believe that this was debated at Harvard a few years back. I don't remember when. But really, I mean, stock after here is just like hypersonic missiles are the new technology, right? We need to stay on like the cutting edge of military development. We need to ensure that we have that lead over our adversaries in case if something does break out, among other things, right? And then the neg is going to argue that this might initiate an arms race. This might invest in technology that actually isn't proven because there is some decent evidence qualifying hypersonic missiles as a very useless investment. Um, yeah, not really else to talk about here. Do you guys have questions? We went really fast on this one, not just because, I mean, pun intended that hypersonic missiles are fast, but like it is a very simple debate about just the technology. So, a bill to establish the Lithium Extraction and Development Act. Context. It is true. This first part is very true. Um, or sorry, this part. A couple months ago, it was discovered, and I want to say some sort of northwestern state. I want to say like I don't remember, Nevada or California or Idaho or something like. No, it was one of them. But I think it was actually Oregon. I think it might have been Oregon. But there was a very, very like huge lithium reserve found, and it might have been one of the largest in the world, if not the largest in the world. Um, and this bill is kind of like just tapping on that, right? Because we don't want to rely on our adversaries for REMs, rare earth minerals, that are critical in most of the technologies that we use today. So, for example, if you don't already know, right, China also is like a major producer of rare earth minerals, but they're also kind of starting to gatekeep. They are going to keep the stuff for themselves to do their own technological development, and that kind of puts us in a pretty big pickle. So this bill is kind of increasing our independence by just relying on the reserves that we have. Um, and we do that by tapping into the lithium reserves that we already have here in the United States. So stock F, increasing independence and allowing us to figure out like more ways to develop our own technology. Um, increased economic stimulus, of course, with any investment bill, you have that. Um, this allows us to find like, oh, never mind. The bill kind of just mentions it here. Lithium is really important for green technology. So this allows us to increase our ability to invest in green technology and make it cheaper because once you have the supply of like one of those expensive minerals in it come down, you're going to have the whole price of the unit come down like solar panel. And so that makes it more accessible, which makes it more available, right? Those are the standard stock F. Um, points, I guess. Neg is that lithium mining is very bad for the environment, so it's kind of counterintuitive, right? You're mining lithium to build green technologies. It doesn't really work. It's like sticking a gas generator in the back of your electric car to save the environment. It's it's well intentioned, but you can definitely weigh the fact that like mining lithium and lithium manufacturing is so carbon intensive that like it kind of offsets the whole point of making the green technology in the first place. And so we need to look for like alternative technologies that don't require lithium. Um, so yeah, stock AF is definitely the whole. This is like what we need to reduce our dependence on China and incentivize our own green technology investment and manufacturing. And the neg is just like, well, actually, it doesn't work the way that you say it does, and this is kind of a whole waste because it doesn't really make much sense. So, and it's counterintuitive. Don't forget that part.
I have a question, but it's a long one, and I probably won't be able to type it out. Um,
Okay.
if so, one, if the EPA is overseeing this, then wouldn't like some of the mining bad argument be mitigated? That's the first part of the question.
Um, just because the EPA is overseeing it, just I mean they have some sort of standards, but like the chances of them like no matter how you do it, I guess what I'm trying to say is that like no matter how you do lithium mining, it is carbon intensive. No matter who's overseeing it, no matter like what regulations are in place, it is carbon intensive. That's kind of what the neg has to go off of. Um, so I don't really think that like even though the EPA has their own standards that companies have to abide by when they're doing the lithium mining, it's not enough to actually fully mitigate the effects of lithium mining. So yeah.
And then the second part was that like if it's only in the Western United States, that one area, if it's in a controlled area, doesn't that also mitigate the um thank you, Lucas. Doesn't that also mitigate the environmental impact?
Um, no, because there are, as far as I know, most of the lithium reserves are on the west side of the country, but like there could be more across the country. We don't really know where they are yet. And even if it's concentrated, it's still a bad like environmental impact. So you can mitigate the whole environmental impact point, but you can't really just say it doesn't exist. because it definitely does, you know, regardless of what impact area it has. So, all right, a bill to create a public option healthcare plan to eliminate healthcare inequity. Um, this is public insurance, basically. We're going to create our own system that allows people to get insurance without paying the exorbitant fees of private healthcare companies that make them so outraged they have to shoot the CEO. This is good for a number of reasons. Primarily, I guess we'll just hop into the stock app here. You're going to have people who can't afford the premiums of private companies. You're going to expand their healthcare access. You're going to expand the treatment that they can get, and you're not going to charge them the crazy amount um, of like a normal private healthcare plan. Um, and that's good because the government healthcare plan is going to compete with private insurers. So it's not going to be how do I say this? It's going to try to be on the same level as private insurers. It might not be on the same level as private insurers in practice, but like it's still trying to compete with them to provide individual healthcare coverage. And so it does through these premiums, which are all of like these, you know, stipulations. So if you make less than or equal to four times the poverty line, you have a maximum of $100 per month, so $1,200 per year, and a maximum of $200 per month for anyone who exceeds that. That's like the only break between like maximum pricing. Still, though, it's a lot cheaper than private healthcare, especially when a lot of like emergencies happen. So yeah, stock AF, like I said, expanding healthcare. Stock neg, this is bad for the healthcare industry, or at least you can frame it as bad, because private healthcare is going to tank really hard after this bill is passed. Why pay thousands of dollars in premiums when you can just pay up to $100 a month if you're in that like, you know, tax bracket? It's not exactly good for the industry because now, I mean, it's good for competition, but that might compromise the quality of care, is what I'm trying to say. People who pay more in America's healthcare system often get better treatment, whether you like it or not. It's a very tragic reality. And as a result, um, this might cause the public or sorry, private healthcare system to almost collapse. You know, it's a very large undercutting to create this premium of $100 per month, considering that current premiums are at potentially thousands of dollars, right? Um, but then again, I think in the context of the debate, the aft can go all in on the idea of just like look at the options that we can give to people with this bill, look at the I like especially for low income people. I think a smart strategy is to talk about low income people. Of course, it's a stock strategy, but like this is what we're talking about here. Like low income people under the private healthcare system don't really have many options to receive medical treatment if something happens to them because it just costs so much money, right? This gives them an alternative like method of paying for those healthcare treatments, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think something that's very much worth researching here is the whole like dichotomy that this would create between the federal government and private businesses, because that in itself is honestly very important. Like, how is this going to affect the private healthcare industry? How is this going to affect hospitals because they might receive lower payouts under this bill, right? So, yeah, definitely look into all of that. All right, on to semis. We've just got four more bills, guys. First one is mobile voting. Um, this is something that we've debated a million times, right? But this one I'm going to make it as simple as possible, and we're going to go pretty quick through this because there is really just like one major af and one major neg. Uh, Context is people are not voting as much as they should because they don't want to, or they're not involved, or the reason that this tried to affect is that they just do not have the means to. And so mail-in ballots and mail voting try to alleviate that problem because instead of having to go to like the ballot box to vote in a federal election, you can just vote from the comfort of your own home and then mail it off. But that has problems of its own. A lot of votes, I think it was about 400,000 in the last federal election, or from 6 years ago, did not get counted because of the fact that mail-in ballots were lost. They were literally like completely not counted in the election because of mail delays or weather or things like that, right? And that's not fair to the people who voted. So this bill kind of like fixes that last patch and also makes the system a lot easier for people to use. It does so by creating a mobile voting option, which just means that you can vote from your phone. Yay. All right, stock F. Increasing accessibility for elections, especially in rural areas. You can definitely talk about that. Talk about the fact that like in these far-fetched areas, you're not going to have like the ability to reach the ballot box, because you're just so far away. Like if you're in the middle of like a countryside area, you're not going to be able to find your way to a ballot box a lot of the time. And so this bill will help you with that because if you have cell connection, then you can just vote from home on your phone. But even for people in cities, like if your day-to-day life is so busy that you can't possibly make time to stand in line for maybe a few hours or just 20 minutes at the ballot box, because of course like the trip time going into it and going there and coming back, this also just makes the option a lot easier. So the AF goes all in on accessibility. The NEG goes all in on cybersecurity. The biggest concern here with the neg is the fact that like this whole Section 2B thing of end-to-end verifiable system and encryption doesn't actually work. It's been hacked many times. Um, and the idea is, look, if those 400,000 mail-in ballots that weren't counted that I told you about, if they were counted, they might have flipped the results of like many swing states, right? Or in the context of if like let's say that, millions of people start doing online voting or mobile voting for their elections. Now you're going to have millions of ballots going through like servers and all that, which are open to being hacked. And if they get changed, then like you've got one hacker group that can control the entire federal election. Now, of course, it's a very like dramatic way of looking at things, but it is nonetheless what the neg is going to argue. Primarily because these systems have not worked in the past. So AF can argue accessibility, but neg can turn the accessibility argument by being like, what good does it even matter if more people can access voting if the votes that they count that they cast don't actually get count properly because they're hacked en route. Um, and so yeah, that's really all there is to mobile voting here. From Lucas, so does the neg argue that hackers change votes or that hackers steal data from voters? Both. Um, you can argue either or. You can argue that hackers can literally change the votes that someone cast, or they can steal the data of voters because they have to put in so much personal information to confirm that they are a voter, such as their social security and all that, right? And that poses a very big risk having all of these voters' information in one big database that can be easily hacked because the cybersecurity stuff we have are not up to standard. So, yeah, either works there. A bill to support Venezuelan migrants. This one is to help Peru. So don't automatically believe the title. But yes, it is for the intention of helping Venezuelan migrants. So all this is doing is $500 million to the Peruvian government to support their efforts. 250 for building transportation infrastructure and housing for resettlement. 150 million for helping the National Police of Peru combat Tren de Aragua, and $100 million for refugee support. So context. Um, of course, because of the whole Venezuela crisis, several hundred thousand of Venezuelan migrants, if not millions, have fled the country in search of a better life elsewhere. And one of these countries that have been very, very hard hit is Peru. Are they the most hard hit from this crisis? No. As far as I know, it's Colombia because it's like the neighbor of Venezuela. But Peru has also been kind of hard hit. So what do we got? We're getting the 250 million specifically and only for the resettlement of these migrants that are coming from Venezuela. That's really good because we are providing, the resources that they need to construct a new life in a new country and whatnot. And yeah, that's pretty self-explanatory. 150 million in Section 2B is important though. There is a big problem with Tren de Aragua, not even so much as what like Trump is saying on the news with like, oh, Tren de Aragua is taking over Colorado and stuff like no. But in Peru, they are kind of a pretty sizable issue. They've caused a lot of problems for the local people, and they've done so because they are very powerful and they it's very hard to stop them. So the National Police of Peru is having a pretty hard time of doing so. Um, but they're still trying. And this bill provides them with more resources to help them do that, which also in turn helps the aid from being stolen, the aid in Section 2A from being stolen. So those kind of go hand in hand there. So do keep that in mind. And then the last $100 million is for direct payments to refugee support organizations operating in Peru. Those I assume are going to go to NPOs and things like that. And all of this is going to be overseen by, of course, the Department of Government Efficiency, but more importantly, the Department of State. Um, so StockAF supporting migrants is good. They've been through hell. Let's give them an easier life, right? Like we are giving them a very big pay package to help them reestablish themselves to come up with like at least a new basis to work off of, at the minimum, right? Which is still better than nothing. Is it like a very, very large amount? Depends, but it's still better than nothing. And this allows us to establish very critical like lifelines for these Venezuelan migrants. Um, on top of that, we're going to be able to curb gang violence by Tren de Aragua and other organizations through Section 2B, which is really important because it will help decrease the amount of violence we're seeing in Peru. Um, Stock neg, of course, might just be like aid dependency. The fact that like the National Police of Peru is not going to work, especially because the Peruvian government is a little bit shaky right now. Um, on top of that, the aid will be stolen because we don't actually have the proper resources to defend it, as per the fact that the National Police of Peru is not all too effective. Um, and that this might actually hurt the Venezuelan migrants more than it helps them because if the aid gets stolen, it will actually strengthen Tren de Aragua, which will be used against the Venezuelan migrants, and just the Peruvian people. So, yeah, nothing too groundbreaking here. Josh says, what do we do? Because the bill says it will take effect on January 1st, 2026, and Doge is gone July 4th, 2026. I would just ignore it. I don't think there's any reason to bring it up. Nobody's really going to talk about it. It's just like one of those things that is like, yeah, you're right, but it doesn't really matter for the debate. Like the debate is very ideological here, and you can't really prove a net harm with any of that. Um, if it does become an issue of contention year round, especially the whole January 1st, 2026 thing, just write an amendment to fix that. Like, just make it Section 5 is now rewritten as this legislation will take effect on July, whatever, 2026. It's, yeah, Lucas is right. This is Harvard Sebs. I think that's just going to be overlooked. It's fine. From Matthew, how do you think this bill would differ from other foreign aid debates? Anything specific to the bill or the situation? Um, Key things, I guess, the Peruvian government, the last president, I think they got a new one, but the last president, she was a woman. She had like a 4% approval rating, which is actually diabolical, but she was a terrible president. And Peru has kind of backslid as a democracy. And the National Police of Peru is very like abusive and things like that. So the whole situation is like a whole crackdown. It's not exactly the people we want to work with, but it's the only people we have to work with. Um, Aside from that, not really much else to talk about in terms of foreign aid. I mean, there's like helping them with the influx of Venezuelan migrants, and you can definitely run a speech on the app that's like, look at what the mess we made in Venezuela with our capturing of Maduro. Like, this is going to provide Peru with whatever they need to at least like even if they don't need it in this instant, it helps them like protect themselves or not protect themselves. Sorry, proactively, that's the word. Proactively like mobilize before the actual like huge influx of migrants comes in. So yeah, I guess those are the only two like major things that I can think of though. A bill to support nuclear investment in the clean energy transition. This is super simple. This is just like last year's final bill. Um, we're expanding into nuclear. and we're developing SMRs, small modular reactors, and we're modernizing facilities. So, context, very key, simple things right here. Nuclear investment is cleaner than other forms of technology. It lasts longer. It is pretty cost effective. The only problem is that it takes a very, very long time to build compared to other methods. Um, the solution to that whole time frame issue is the development of small modular reactors, which are literally designed to be factory built. I'm not joking. We are going to be factory building literal nuclear reactors, which is kind of cool, but also kind of scary, depending on how you look at it. Either way, that's going to address the whole time frame issue, right? Um, and so this bill is going to support the R&D of those technologies, these SMRs. On top of that, we're going to modernize our facilities, which is really important because a lot of our facilities are kind of old and they need to be fixed. Right? Awesome. So, stock F. Anything climate change always has the same stock F, which is climate disasters, reliability, power grid support, et cetera, et cetera. Like anything of that sort. Um, and to supplement that, we're going to remove all existing federal subsidies for these fossil fuel explorations and production. Um, so this is a really, really big like paradigm shift in our policy for energy, and we're instead going to be fully embracing clean energy and nuclear power as like the future to help mitigate the effects of the climate crisis. Stock neg is the same neg as any other nuclear debate. You've got the whole nuclear waste argument, the fact that we can't dispose of it properly, and it gets dumped literally anywhere. You've got the whole fact that time frame is still an issue. SMRs are in the like infancy phase, and that means that they might not be ready for the time that we need to have them by the time that like climate crisis becomes a very, very like irreversible issue. Um, so yeah, I mean, this is basically like any nuclear debate ever. Do you guys have any specific questions? I think that would help me better help you here, but it is nothing groundbreaking with this piece of legislation. It is all the same. What did you say for the neg? I kind of missed it. Okay, quick summary of the neg. For any nuclear bill, talk about like the neg kind of argues time frame that's like this is not really what we need now because the problem with nuclear energy is that it takes such a long time to build and it's not going to be ready by the time like we've reached that breaking point in the climate crisis of like irreversibility. So this is going to make fossil fuels expensive as per Section 2A. It's going to make fossil fuels harder to find as per Section 2B. And as a result, it's going to incentivize a transition into a technology that will not be ready for a very long time, which has very big, like negative economic ramifications. So that's kind of just like the core neg, I think. So hopefully that helps. Okay, from Matthew. Do you think building SMRs and ending fossil fuel subsidies will make the debate a much more different from a normal nuclear debate? No. Kind of because a normal nuclear debate, first off, kind of predicates off the whole like transitioning to clean energy regardless. The existing federal fuel subsidies kind of just makes it permanent and it gives some more neg ground because of the whole transition period thing. And in terms of building SMRs, I think that's a more AF ground. So the SMRs is good for the AF and the whole like federal subsidies is good for the neg. But aside from those things, like I don't see anything changing. A bill to prevent evergreening in medical industry patents to expand affordable access to life-saving treatments. So, background. Pharmaceutical companies are like filthy rich, and they enjoy being filthy rich. So, they try to monopolize any technology, and by technology I mean medication, that they have. They do so through the practice of evergreening, which is the idea of abusing the patent system so that no one can compete with them on a drug that they invented. Let's say, I'll give you an example of this. Let's say, like, I invented a drug that fixed headaches forever. Okay, you took it once and you never have a headache for the rest of your life, right? Hypothetically. I don't want anyone else making that drug because I can monopolize that drug. And so anyone who doesn't want to have a headache ever again has to take my drug. So how do I do that? If I file a patent on the drug, then I'm the only one that can make it, right? No one else can make it. So I'm going to file a patent. But patents expire. So in time, other people can start producing my stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to barely change the medicine, literally like barely, maybe change like a couple of molecules in it, and then I'm going to repatent it as a new medicine. And so I'll get another few years extended on my exclusivity. So I won't have to worry about other people producing my drug. And then once that time period's up, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to barely change my drug and I'm going to patent it again. And this goes on for on and on and on. And so companies practice what's called evergreening, which is exactly that. They continuously extend the patent's life of their product by just barely changing it. Um, and that's what this is talking about, right? Like evergreening refers to the practice of obtaining secondary patents for minor modifications to an existing medical product to extend market exclusivity without significant therapeutic improvement. Um, that's all this bill is doing. It's trying to stop that. So, stock F. Obviously, competition lowers prices, right? It's like always a race to the bottom. So if you've got more people producing the same drug, like that never have a headache ever again drug, um, you're going to have cheaper prices because the two companies or three companies or four companies or five companies or however many companies that produce that drug are all going to be competing price-wise against each other. And in turn, that makes the drug more accessible, right? Which makes prices lower, which makes more people able to enjoy the drug or use it if they really do need it. Um, and in the context of legitimate drugs, not just like the one I made up, but in like real life-saving medication, that is super, super, super important because it makes all sorts of drugs so much cheaper, right? And so people can devote that money to other things. They won't have to go bankrupt just to stay alive. It's a very deep issue. Um, Stock neg though always goes about like research, the research and development path. And it's like evergreening provides companies with the monopoly, and they kind of need it because the monopoly provides them with more than enough like financial basis so that they can reinvest into R&D. What that basically means in layman's terms is just like by monopolizing a drug, the company gets all the sales from that drug and like maximizes the sales from that drug such that they have now more money because they're the only one selling that drug, and they put all that money back into R&D, into investing in new drugs, right? And it creates a cycle. So the idea is that evergreening is somewhat good because companies use it to commit to more research and development, right? So in the context of the debate, after the accessibility, neg is the whole research and development. Those are the core arguments. Of course, there's a bunch of more arguments, but I think on those two alone, the af and the neg are actually pretty balanced. Um, because the thing is that there's a lot of drugs that like are very, very, very niche that require a lot of research and development to address a disease that maybe like one out of every 100,000 people have. And that R&D is not going to be done if the pharmaceutical companies do not have the incentive to do so, and evergreening is that incentive, right? Um, so it might actually decrease accessibility over time because now, yes, stock drugs and generic drugs with large markets will have a lot more accessibility, but niche drugs are going to suffer, right? Um, so I think the debate can go either way, and I think it all comes down to weighing. Again, it's not a bad idea to go late here, but it really is all up to you. So, from Josh, what happens to the old recipe though? It's included in the new patent. Also, the recipe is basically the same, so nothing happens to it. The old recipe is just recycled, but it's not published. From Lucas, do you think a lot of the debate will be around 3B? The FTC shall investigate and penalize anti-competitive patent practices that restrict generic or biosimilar market entry. Why would there be a lot of debate about that? I think like that's just an enforcement mechanism. Anti-competitive patent practices are anything that try to like monopolize a drug, which includes evergreening. But I mean, they'll penalize accordingly. They don't have to penalize if they don't they don't have to penalize if they don't think it's necessary, you know? Like there is a little bit of nuance there. There is like some judgment that needs to be executed. Um in each situation. So I mean, yeah, I don't think there's going to be a lot of debate around 3D, 3B though. So